I never thought buying my first home would lead to the biggest heartbreak of my life. For years, I'd been saving quietly. Every extra dollar from overtime, every late-night freelance project, every skipped meal out, all went into a small fund I never talked about. My parents always said I wasn't good with money, that I was too impulsive, that I'd never manage on my own. Maybe that's why I didn't tell them when I finally did something big. Maybe deep down, I wanted to prove them wrong. After years of planning, I bought a duplex. It wasn't fancy, just two small units on a quiet street, a tiny yard out front, and a cracked driveway that I swore I'd fix one day, but it was mine. The first time I held the keys in my hand, I just stood there staring at the chipped paint on the door, tears in my eyes. It felt like all those nights working late and all those little sacrifices had finally meant something. I promised myself I'd wait to tell my parents until I had it fixed up a bit. I wanted to surprise them, maybe even see pride in their eyes for once. A few weeks later, I told them over dinner. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding, "I bought a duplex." The clinking of silverware stopped, my mother froze mid-bite, and my father slowly looked up from his plate. "You bought what?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp, like he was trying to process what I just said. I laughed nervously. "A duplex, 2 units. I'm going to live in one and rent out the other." My mother's expression hardened. "You made a huge decision like that without asking us?" That word asking stung. I was 28, I didn't need permission. I tried to explain that I wanted to surprise them, that it wasn't about hiding anything. But the more I talked, the quieter they got. My dad forced a smile and said, "Well, congratulations, that's something." Then they went back to eating. That night I went home wondering if I'd done something wrong. Maybe they just needed time to process it, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about their reaction wasn't right. It wasn't disappointment, it was something else. A mix of surprise, discomfort, maybe jealousy. A few weeks later, little things started happening that didn't make sense. I'd stop by the duplex after work, painting walls, measuring spaces, trying to imagine what life there would look like. One evening, I noticed the back gate was wide open. I was sure I'd locked it. Then a week later, I got a call from the city utilities office saying there'd been a request to transfer the water account to a different name. I hadn't made any request. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the duplex and checked the lockbox where I kept the spare keys. One set was missing. My chest tightened. Someone had been inside. I remember standing in that empty living room, the smell of fresh paint still hanging in the air, and feeling this cold fear I couldn't explain. I changed the locks, installed cameras, and told no one, not even my parents. Something in me just knew I shouldn't. A few days later, the camera sent me an alert in the middle of the night. Motion detected. I opened the app on my phone, expecting maybe a raccoon or a stray cat, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was my father. He was inside my duplex, flashlight in hand, walking from room to room like he owned the place. And behind him was my mother. They were whispering to each other, checking walls, opening cabinets, inspecting corners. I turned up the volume. My mother's voice came through softly but clear enough. "This one will rent easily," she said. "Maybe we can sell it after a few months." My dad nodded. "She'll never know if we put it under our name. She doesn't understand paperwork anyway." I just froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The very people who raised me, who taught me about honesty, about family, were plotting to take what I'd worked for. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, pure, deliberate betrayal. That night I sat in my car outside the duplex, shaking. Every part of me wanted to drive to their house, pound on the door, and scream. But something stopped me. A voice inside said, "Wait, watch, see how far they'll go." So I kept quiet. A week later, my realtor called. "Hey, your parents stopped by the office," he said. "They said they're the co-owners and need copies of the title deed." I hung up without saying a word. I couldn't believe it. My own parents were trying to steal my home, the one I'd bought with my own savings. It hit me then that they weren't proud of me. They were jealous, maybe threatened. They couldn't stand that I'd done something they hadn't controlled. The next few days, I barely slept. I replayed their words from the video over and over. Every "she'll never know," every "under our name" echoing in my head. I felt anger, sadness, confusion, all tangled together. How do you confront the people who gave you life for betraying your trust? I didn't know. So instead of fighting back right away, I decided to be quiet and smart. When they asked how things were going with the duplex, I pretended everything was normal. "Oh, still working through the paperwork," I'd say. They smiled like they'd gotten away with something, but what they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer. I showed him the footage, the missing key incident, the utility transfer attempt, everything. He listened carefully and said, "Don't worry, they can't take your property, let's make this official." Together, we filed all the proper documentation, reaffirming the title solely under my name. Then he sent a formal letter to my parents, polite, but firm, making it clear that any claim or interference would be considered fraud. A few days later, my phone rang, my mother's voice trembled. "Why would you do this to us?" she asked, as if I was the one who'd betrayed them. I wanted to yell because you tried to steal from me, but I didn't. Instead, I said quietly, "I didn't do anything, I just protected what's mine." There was silence, then she hung up. After that, everything changed. They stopped visiting. The weekly family dinners disappeared. When relatives asked why things felt tense, my parents just shrugged and said I'd grown distant. I didn't bother defending myself. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words ever could. Months passed. I finished renovating the duplex. The walls were freshly painted, the floors gleamed, and I'd rented out the other unit to a sweet young family who loved it instantly. I finally moved into my space. Every night I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the street I'd grown up on, and think about how strange life had become. My parents lived only a few blocks away, but it felt like we were worlds apart. One afternoon, I was watering the small garden out front when I saw my mother standing by the fence. She looked smaller somehow, older. Her eyes were red. She didn't say hello. She just stared for a moment before whispering, "You really hurt your father." I turned off the hose and looked at her. "You hurt me first." She didn't deny it. She just looked down, twisting her hands together. "We thought you'd forget us," she said softly. "Once you moved out, once you had your own place, we thought you'd stop needing us." For a moment, all the anger in me softened into something else, sadness. Their betrayal hadn't come from greed, not really. It came from fear of being left behind, fear of losing control. It didn't make what they did right, but it made it human. We stood there for a long time, not saying much else. When she finally left, I felt this strange mix of closure and emptiness. I didn't forgive them that day. Honestly, I'm not sure I ever will completely, but I decided not to carry the anger anymore. It was heavy and I'd already carried it long enough. Over the next year, I focused on myself. I paid off the last bit of my mortgage. I decorated my home with things that made me happy, small plants, soft lights, a cozy reading chair by the window. And every time I turned the key in the door, I reminded myself I earned this. I still talk to my parents occasionally. Birthdays, holidays, polite phone calls. It's cordial but distant. We don't bring up the duplex and we don't pretend things are the same, but that's okay. I've learned that sometimes protecting yourself means accepting distance. What happened taught me more about love and trust than any book or advice ever could. It taught me that family doesn't automatically mean loyalty. It taught me that even the people who say they love you the most can cross lines when fear and pride take over. But it also taught me strength. Real, quiet strength, the kind that doesn't come from shouting or fighting back, but from standing your ground with dignity. Sometimes I think about that night, watching them on the camera, whispering in my house, and I realize that was the moment I truly grew up. It was painful, but it was freeing. I learned that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need anyone to validate my success. Now when I walk through those doors, I feel peace. I see the sunlight through the windows, hear the laughter of the family next door, smell the flowers I planted myself, and I feel proud. Not because I proved my parents wrong, but because I proved something to myself, that I'm capable, that I can build a life on my own terms. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that sometimes the hardest betrayals lead to the strongest boundaries. You can love people and still protect yourself from them. You can forgive, but you don't have to forget. You can let go without letting them back in. Buying that duplex wasn't just about owning property. It was about reclaiming my independence, my confidence, and my peace. And if anyone listening to this has ever felt guilty for standing up to family, don't. You're not wrong for setting boundaries. You're not selfish for wanting peace. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is protect what's yours, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. At the end of the day, the only approval you really need is your own.